Please, take me away from here. I can't marry him. Nina Carter pressed send before she could lose the courage to do it. Her hands trembled so violently that she nearly dropped the phone onto the marble floor of the bridal suite. The soft golden lighting, the delicate scent of roses, the carefully arranged makeup brushes laid out by the stylist, all of it felt unreal, like a stage set prepared for someone else's life. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. The white silk robe tied around her waist felt heavier than it should. Outside the bathroom door, she could hear the low hum of voices, her mother speaking with her aunt, the gentle clinking of glasses, the quiet excitement of a family convinced something beautiful was about to happen. Nothing about this felt beautiful. Her reflection in the mirror looked composed in a way she did not feel. 29 years old. Blonde hair styled into soft waves, pinned just enough to appear effortless. Makeup subtle and elegant, chosen to match the expectations of a traditional American wedding. Everything looked right. Everything felt wrong. Her phone vibrated. Nina glanced down automatically, expecting to see Melissa's name appear on the screen. Instead, her heart dropped so suddenly she had to grab the edge of the sink. Adrian Volkov. The message had been sent to Adrian Volkov, her employer. Her breath caught in her throat. For a second, she could not think, could not even understand what she was seeing. She checked again, hoping somehow the screen would correct itself. It did not. She had just sent a desperate plea for rescue to the most powerful man she knew. Oh no, she whispered. Her mind raced. She should send another message immediately. Wrong person. Please ignore. I'm sorry. But before she could type a single word, the phone began to ring. Adrian Volkov calling. Nina froze. He never called staff directly, not unless something serious had happened. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at the screen. The call continued, steady, patient, impossible to ignore. She answered, "Hello?" There was no greeting on the other end, no polite distance, only silence for half a second, the kind of silence that carries weight. Then his voice came, low, controlled, unmistakably direct. "Where are you?" Her throat tightened. She had heard Adrian speak hundreds of times over the past 4 years, but never like this. Never stripped of the calm professional distance he always maintained. At the hotel," she said quietly. "Downtown. Are you alone?" She glanced toward the closed bathroom door. For a minute, another pause. "You're getting married today." It was not a question. "Yes. Do you want this marriage?" Her eyes filled instantly. She pressed her fingers against her lips to keep her voice steady. "No." The word came out smaller than she intended, but it carried truth she could no longer hide. On the other end of the line, Adrian exhaled slowly. 4 years Nina had worked in his house. 4 years of quiet mornings placing coffee on his desk at exactly the same angle. 4 years of carefully maintaining professional distance. Never once had she crossed the invisible boundary between employer and employee. "I didn't mean to send that to you," she whispered quickly. "I'm sorry. I thought I was texting my friend." "I know," he replied. His tone did not change. "What's his name?" Adrian asked. "Charles Whitmore." Silence again, but this time Nina could almost feel something shifting on the other end of the call, like a door opening somewhere she could not see. "How long have you known him?" "A few weeks." "Why are you marrying him?" She hesitated. "My father owes money, a lot of money. This solves the problem." Another pause. "Nina," he said quietly, "look at me." She blinked, confused. "Look at me?" she repeated softly. At the phone, he clarified, "I need to hear the truth." Her voice trembled. "I don't want this, but I don't see another way." There was no immediate response. Then, "There is always another way." The certainty in his voice made her chest tighten. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bathtub. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He can ruin my family financially. My father will lose everything." "I understand perfectly." The words were calm, measured, final. Another pause passed between them, shorter now, more focused. "Is the ceremony today?" "Yes." "What time?" 2 o'clock. "What hotel?" "The Langford." She heard the faint sound of movement on the other end, a door closing, footsteps, the quiet efficiency of someone already in motion. "Listen to me carefully," Adrian said. His voice had shifted slightly, still controlled but unmistakably firm. "Do not sign anything." Her breath caught. "Do not agree to anything privately." "Okay." "And Nina." She waited. If you want to leave, you will leave. Her eyes closed as tears finally slipped down her cheeks. You barely know what's happening, she said. I know enough. His tone softened almost imperceptibly. You asked for help. She covered her mouth with her hand. I didn't mean to ask you. That doesn't change the fact that you did. Another silence. Then, I'm coming. Her eyes opened. What? I'm coming, he repeated. You don't have to. Yes, he said calmly. I do. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely think. This doesn't involve you. It does now. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Nina. Yes? Trust me. She did not know why, but she nodded, even though he could not see her. Okay, I'll call you when I arrive. The line disconnected. Nina remained sitting on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the dark screen of her phone. Her breathing felt uneven, unfamiliar. For 4 years, Adrian Volkov had existed in her life as a distant, disciplined presence. A man defined by restraint. A man who never crossed boundaries. Now he was coming to her wedding. A soft knock sounded at the bathroom door. Nina? Her mother called gently. Sweetheart, we need to start getting you into the dress. Nina wiped her cheeks quickly. I'm coming. She stood slowly, placing the phone against her chest for just a second before slipping it into the pocket of her robe. Outside, everything continued as planned. Flowers were arranged. Music waited. Guests were arriving. A wedding was still scheduled. But something had changed. Somewhere in the city, a man who never acted without purpose had just decided to intervene. The zipper of the wedding dress sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. Each small metallic click sealing Nina Carter deeper into a decision she still did not fully believe was real. The gown fit perfectly. Of course it did. Everything about this day had been carefully arranged to appear flawless. Ivory silk draped smoothly along her frame, elegant without being extravagant, the kind of dress meant to communicate grace, stability, good judgment, the kind of dress that reassured older relatives that a woman had chosen wisely. Her mother's hands trembled as she adjusted the fabric along Nina's shoulders. You look beautiful, her mother whispered, voice thick with emotion. Nina smiled gently, the way she had learned to smile when other people needed reassurance more than truth. I'm glad you like it. Her aunt clasped her hands together. Charles is a very respectable man. You're going to have a secure life. That matters more than anything. The words seemed to echo in Nina's thoughts. Security, stability, sensibility. Words often used when love was absent, but no one wished to say so directly. The bridal suite buzzed with quiet activity. Makeup brushes swept softly across her cheekbones. A bridesmaid carefully arranged the delicate veil so that it fell in a smooth line down her back. Someone opened a small bottle of perfume her mother had saved for years, something floral and understated, chosen long ago for a daughter's future wedding day. Nina stood very still while the world moved around her. Her phone rested hidden inside the small satin purse placed discreetly on the dressing table. Adrian had not called again yet. She told herself she did not expect him to come, that the conversation had been nothing more than a moment of unexpected kindness from an employer who happened to overhear distress. Perhaps he would send a lawyer. Perhaps nothing would happen at all. Perhaps she would walk down the aisle. Repeat vows she did not believe. And life would continue in the quiet, manageable way many lives did. Her father entered the room slowly, dressed in a dark suit that hung slightly loose at the shoulders. Frank Carter had always been a solid man, someone who filled space comfortably. But the past months had taken something from him. His eyes moved over his daughter with visible effort to maintain composure. You okay, kiddo? He asked gently. The question held more meaning than the words themselves. Nina nodded. I'm okay, Dad. He studied her face, the way fathers do when they sense something unspoken but choose not to force it into the open. You don't have to do anything today that doesn't feel right, he said quietly. She swallowed. It's already done. Frank exhaled slowly, placing one hand over hers. I hate that it came to this. Nina squeezed his fingers. It's just practical, she replied softly. The lie sat between them, fragile but accepted. An hour later, the church stood bathed in the pale warmth of early afternoon sunlight. The building itself was old Chicago architecture, stone walls softened by decades of quiet ceremonies, polished wooden pews carrying the weight of countless promises spoken beneath its high ceilings. Soft classical music drifted through the space as guests found their seats. greeting one another with polite smiles and hushed voices that reflected the solemn importance of the occasion. Charles Whitmore stood near the altar speaking with the officiant, posture straight, expression composed. At 62, he carried himself with the careful confidence of a man accustomed to being respected. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit tailored to precision. To anyone observing from a distance, he appeared exactly what Nina's family had described: established, stable, reassuring. When Nina approached the front of the church to prepare for the ceremony, Charles turned toward her with a polite smile. "You look lovely," he said. "Thank you." His eyes lingered slightly too long, as though assessing an acquisition rather than admiring a bride. "This is the right decision," he added quietly. "You'll understand that more with time." Nina nodded without responding. Behind her calm expression, her thoughts remained fixed on the phone hidden in her purse. Still no message. Still no sign. Perhaps this was how adulthood worked, she thought. People accepted compromises they never imagined making when they were younger. People learned to choose stability over uncertainty. Perhaps romantic ideals belonged to youth, while responsibility belonged to everyone else. Guests continued to arrive. Colleagues of Charles shook hands with her father. Distant relatives complimented the floral arrangements. An older woman squeezed Nina's arm gently and said, "Marriage is about partnership, dear. Passion fades. Character remains." Nina thanked her politely. Her heart beat steadily, but without excitement. Only endurance. The ceremony began promptly at 2 o'clock. Music filled the church as the bridesmaids walked slowly down the aisle, each step measured, rehearsed. The soft rustle of fabric echoed faintly in the quiet room. Nina waited just beyond the entrance doors, her father standing beside her. Frank Carter looked at his daughter carefully. "You still have time," he murmured. She met his eyes. "It's okay," she said, though her voice carried uncertainty she could not completely hide. The doors opened. Light streamed inward, illuminating the aisle stretching toward the altar where Charles waited with composed patience. Every face turned toward her, smiling, expectant. The familiar choreography of tradition unfolded exactly as intended. Nina stepped forward. The veil softened the edges of her vision, turning the world slightly distant, slightly unreal. She focused on the rhythm of walking, the steady presence of her father's arm beneath her hand, the faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. Halfway down the aisle, she felt her purse vibrate softly. One brief vibration, then silence. Her breath caught, but she did not break stride. Her father's grip tightened slightly, sensing the subtle change in her posture. When they reached the altar, Charles extended his hand. She placed hers into it automatically. His palm felt cool and dry. The officiant began speaking, voice warm, practiced, reassuring. Words about commitment, trust, shared futures. Words that had united couples for generations. Words meant to comfort families gathered to witness something sacred. Nina heard the sentences but could not fully absorb them. Her thoughts remained fixed on the single vibration she had felt moments earlier. Had Adrian arrived? Had he changed his mind? Had she imagined the entire conversation? Charles leaned slightly closer, speaking under his breath. "You're doing the right thing." She did not answer. The officiant continued. "Marriage is built upon patience, understanding, and the willingness to grow together through all seasons of life." Nina's fingers felt cold. It is a promise made not only to one another, but to the values that sustain family and community. Her heart began to beat faster. And if anyone present knows of any lawful reason, the church doors behind her opened with a soft but unmistakable sound, but different enough that several guests turned instinctively. Nina did not move at first. She did not need to. Something in the air had changed. If this moment stirred something in your heart, tell me how you felt while listening. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever faced a choice between security and love, like Nina did? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story matters here. And if you truly empathize with Nina's quiet courage, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to support more stories that remind us justice, loyalty, and truth still have a voice. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in attention, a quiet ripple of awareness moving through the room. The officiant hesitated briefly, then continued speaking, attempting to maintain the ceremony's calm rhythm. Charles frowned slightly, glancing toward the back of the church. Nina slowly turned her head and saw him. Adrian Volkov stood just inside the doorway. dressed in a dark suit, posture composed, expression unreadable. He was not accompanied by visible security, not making any display of authority. Yet something about his presence altered the atmosphere instantly. People near the entrance stepped aside without being asked. Conversations stopped. Movement slowed. He walked forward at an unhurried pace, his attention fixed entirely on Nina. The sound of his footsteps against the stone floor seemed louder than it should have been. Measured, certain. The officiant stopped speaking. Silence settled across the church like a held breath. Adrian approached until only a few steps separated him from the altar. He did not acknowledge Charles. He did not acknowledge the guests. He looked only at Nina. His voice, when he spoke, was calm enough that everyone leaned forward to hear it. "You texted me." The words carried no accusation, only truth. Nina felt her pulse in her throat. Everything she had believed inevitable suddenly felt uncertain again. Adrian's gaze did not waver. "I'm here," he said quietly. Adrian's words did not echo loudly, yet they carried through the church with unmistakable clarity. "I'm here." For a moment, no one moved. The silence felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Nina's fingers tightened unconsciously around the small bouquet she still held. Her mind struggled to catch up with reality. He had come. He had walked into a private wedding ceremony filled with people who did not know him, and he had done so without hesitation. Charles Whitmore recovered first. "I'm afraid this is a private event," Charles said, his voice polite but edged with irritation. "You must have mistaken the location." Adrian did not look at him. His eyes remained on Nina, calm, steady, patient. "You asked me to come," he said simply. A quiet murmur spread among the guests. Her mother shifted uneasily in the front pew. Her father's expression hardened with cautious confusion. People began exchanging glances, attempting to understand what kind of connection could bring a man like Adrian Volkov into such an intimate moment. Nina felt every heartbeat like a small impact against her ribs. She began, but her voice faltered. Charles stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Adrian and the altar. "My fiancée is under considerable stress today," Charles said smoothly. "I'm sure whatever misunderstanding occurred can be handled after the ceremony." Adrian finally turned his head toward him. The look was not aggressive, not confrontational, simply assessing. "Mr. Whitmore," Adrian said calmly. Charles stiffened slightly at the recognition. "I'm aware of who you are," Charles replied, maintaining composure. "I assumed you would be." There was no hostility in Adrian's tone, only quiet certainty. The officiant cleared his throat, uncertain how to proceed. "Perhaps we should take a moment," he suggested carefully. Charles forced a small laugh, attempting to restore normalcy. "There's no need. Everything is perfectly fine." Adrian spoke again before the officiant could resume. "Nina," he said, his voice lowering slightly, directing the moment back to its center. "If you want to leave, walk to me." The room seemed to contract around the simplicity of the statement. Nina's breath caught. Her thoughts collided all at once. The quiet humiliation of needing rescue, the fear of choosing wrong. Her gaze drifted briefly to Charles. He was watching her now with a tight, controlled expression she had not seen before. "You're nervous," he said quietly. "That's natural." His fingers pressed lightly against her hand, just enough to signal possession. "Everything will settle once we're married." Nina felt something inside her chest tighten. She had felt this pressure before, a life arranged without her permission. Her eyes moved back to Adrian. He had not stepped closer, had not interrupted again. He simply stood, waiting, as though he understood that whatever happened next could not be forced. The weight of expectation pressed in from every direction. A lifetime of being reasonable urged her to remain where she stood, to avoid embarrassment, to avoid conflict, to avoid disappointing the people she loved. Her father's voice echoed quietly in her memory. "You don't have to do anything that doesn't feel right." Her grip loosened slightly on the bouquet. Charles noticed immediately. "This is unnecessary," he said softly, his smile tightening. "We've already resolved the important matters." Nina realized suddenly that no one had asked her what she wanted when the agreement was first discussed. Everyone had focused on what needed to be solved. Words that sounded responsible. Words that sounded adult. Words that quietly erased choice. Adrian spoke once more, not louder, but with unmistakable clarity. "You are not obligated to solve problems created by other people's mistakes." The sentence landed with unexpected force. Charles's composure flickered. I believe this is inappropriate, he said firmly. You are interfering in a private family matter. Adrian's expression remained neutral. No, he replied calmly. I'm responding to a request for help. Nina felt her pulse quicken. She had never imagined someone would say those words for her. Request for help. Simply a request. Her eyes filled unexpectedly. For months she had convinced herself she was doing the mature thing, sacrificing personal happiness for family stability. But now, standing between two futures, she felt something shift deep inside her. Responsibility was not supposed to erase dignity. Charles leaned closer, lowering his voice further. Think carefully, he murmured. Walking away now would create consequences for your family. The statement was quiet enough that only she could hear it. The pressure returned instantly. Adrian did not react outwardly, but something in his posture changed slightly, as though a line had been quietly crossed. He extended his hand. If you choose to stay, he said evenly, I will leave. The room seemed to hold its breath. The word existed now in real form, standing only a few steps away. Nina looked at her father. Frank Carter's face was conflicted, caught between pride and fear, love and regret. For the first time since this situation began, the decision rested fully in her hands. Her mother watched anxiously, twisting a handkerchief between trembling fingers. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the gravity of the moment even without understanding its full meaning. Her gaze returned to Adrian. He had not moved closer, had not tried to persuade her further. His expression carried something unfamiliar. He would accept whatever decision she made. That realization changed everything. She looked down at the bouquet in her hands. White roses, carefully arranged. She thought of the years ahead if she stayed. Dinners arranged by schedule, polite conversation, careful obedience, a life lived correctly but not freely. Then she imagined something else. Her fingers loosened. The bouquet slipped from her hands. It fell softly to the floor. The sound was barely audible, but everyone heard it. Nina stepped back from Charles. One step, then another. Charles's expression hardened. This is a mistake, he said sharply. She did not answer. Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her fingertips. Each step toward Adrian felt unreal, as though gravity itself had shifted direction. Her father exhaled slowly, eyes closing briefly in something that looked like both fear and relief. When she reached Adrian, she stopped just in front of him. Up close, he looked exactly as he always had. You're certain? He asked quietly. She nodded. Yes. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the choice. Then, without touching her immediately, he turned toward the aisle. Only when she moved beside him did his hand gently close around hers. Behind them, Charles's voice broke through the silence. You're making a serious error. Adrian did not turn around. Possibly, he replied calmly. Then he continued walking. The church remained silent as the two of them moved down the aisle together. Only the sound of footsteps echoing softly against polished stone. Nina did not look back. For the first time in months, the future felt unknown. And strangely, that felt like freedom. The church doors closed quietly behind them, sealing the stunned silence inside, while the outside world continued in its ordinary rhythm. Afternoon light stretched across the stone steps, warm and almost indifferent to the upheaval that had just taken place. Cars passed along the street. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck idled with its engine humming steadily. Life, as it always did, refused to pause for private revolutions. Nina realized she was still holding Adrian's hand. His grip was firm but not possessive, steady in a way that grounded her racing thoughts. Only when they reached the bottom of the steps did he release her gently, allowing space as though reminding her that the choice remained hers at every moment. Neither of them spoke immediately. Guests inside the church began murmuring, the low ripple of confusion growing louder as reality settled into the room behind them. The heavy wooden doors remained closed, but Nina could almost feel the weight of expectation pressing from the other side. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. I'm sorry, she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Adrian looked at her, brows drawing slightly together. For what? For dragging you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere. His voice was calm, matter of fact. You asked for help. I chose to come. She studied his face, trying to understand what he was feeling. But Adrian had always been difficult to read. Control was written into every movement he made, every decision he revealed only when necessary. I didn't think you actually would, she admitted. That's usually when help matters most. A black car waited at the curb, engine running. Nina recognized the driver from the estate. A quiet man named Victor, who rarely spoke but noticed everything. He stepped out smoothly and opened the rear door without question. Adrian gestured toward the car but did not insist. If you'd prefer to go somewhere else, say so. Nina hesitated only briefly before nodding. I don't think I can go back inside. You won't need to. She slid into the seat, smoothing the heavy fabric of the wedding dress as best she could. Adrian entered on the opposite side, maintaining a respectful distance. The door closed softly, sealing them into a quiet interior scented faintly with leather and cedar. As the car pulled away from the church, Nina looked down at her hands. They were still trembling. You're safe, Adrian said quietly. The simplicity of the statement made her throat tighten unexpectedly. Such a simple word, yet it had felt very far away for months. They drove through familiar Chicago streets, passing brick townhouses, corner cafes, pedestrians enjoying the mild afternoon. Ordinary life continued just beyond the glass, unaware of the decision that had just altered her future entirely. After several minutes, Nina spoke. My father's dead. I'm aware. You don't know the full situation. I do, Adrian replied calmly. She turned toward him in surprise. You investigated? Yes. When? When you told me his name. The efficiency of the answer left her momentarily speechless. You didn't have time. I made time. She watched the city pass outside the window, trying to process everything that had happened within the past hour. Charles said the debt would disappear if I married him. It would, Adrian said. And now? Now it will disappear without requiring that condition. Her brow furrowed slightly. How? Adrian folded his hands loosely in his lap. Charles Whitmore's financial stability depends heavily on maintaining a particular public image. The circumstances today will encourage him to avoid unnecessary attention. You mean he'll just walk away? I mean he will prefer discretion over conflict. Nina exhaled slowly. You didn't threaten him. I didn't need to. The quiet confidence in his voice made her uneasy and reassured at the same time. They drove in silence for another moment before Nina spoke again. You knew I didn't want this marriage? I suspected. Why didn't you say anything before today? Adrian's gaze shifted briefly toward the passing skyline. Because it wasn't my decision to interfere with. And now it is? Now you asked. The distinction settled heavily between them. She turned slightly in her seat, studying him more carefully. You've always been very careful about boundaries. Yes. Why? Because power complicates consent. The answer surprised her. She had not expected honesty delivered so directly. You think I would feel obligated, she said quietly. I know you would. He did not soften the truth. You value independence. That's one of the reasons I respect you. Nina absorbed the words slowly. The car turned toward the familiar iron gates of Volkov Estate. The property stood as it always had. Quiet. Immaculate. Removed from the chaos of ordinary life. Tall trees framed the long driveway, their branches moving gently in the late afternoon breeze. As the gates opened, Nina felt a strange sense of disorientation. Only hours ago, this had been her workplace. Now she was arriving wearing a wedding dress that symbolized a life she had just refused. Inside the house, the atmosphere remained unchanged. The polished floors reflected warm light. Fresh flowers arranged earlier that morning still stood in crystal vases along the hallway. Everything looked exactly as it had when she left the day before. Adrian gestured toward the sitting room. You should rest. I'm not sure I can. You don't have to decide anything today. She laughed softly, though the sound carried little humor. I already made a very large decision today. Yes, he acknowledged. You did. Nina moved slowly toward the tall windows overlooking the garden. The familiar view calmed her slightly. She had cleaned these windows countless times, always careful not to leave streaks, always conscious of preserving the quiet perfection expected in the house. I embarrassed my family, she said quietly. No, Adrian replied. You made a difficult choice publicly. That feels like the same thing. It isn't. She turned back toward him. People our parents' age believe reputation is everything. They also understand regret. The statement lingered in the room. My father will worry, she admitted. He won't face this alone. You barely know him. I know enough to recognize a man who tried to solve his problems responsibly. She hesitated. You've already done something, haven't you? Adrian did not answer immediately. Your father's debt will no longer influence his decisions, he said finally. How? By tomorrow morning, the matter will be resolved. Nina's eyes widened slightly. You paid it. I corrected a situation that should not have existed. That's the same thing. No, he said calmly. It isn't. She shook her head slightly. You can't just solve everything. I didn't solve everything, Adrian replied. You did the most difficult part yourself. She considered that quietly. Words she had nearly surrendered. I don't want to owe you anything, she said carefully. You don't. That doesn't feel true. You asked for help, he repeated, not permission to be controlled. The distinction mattered. She could feel it. Adrian moved toward the sideboard and poured a glass of water, placing it gently in her hands. You should drink something. Thank you. Her fingers brushed the glass, grounding her in the present moment. After a long silence, she spoke again. Why did you come yourself? His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, because some situations shouldn't be delegated. That's not the whole answer. No, he agreed quietly. He met her eyes. I came because you matter. The honesty in the words left no room for misunderstanding. Nina felt the weight of them settle slowly in her chest. For years, Adrian Volkov had remained a distant presence in her life, a man defined by discipline and restraint. Now he stood in front of her not as an employer, not as a powerful figure others feared, but as someone who had stepped forward when she had believed no one would. Outside, evening light began to soften the edges of the garden. Inside, silence felt different now. Possibility had entered the room quietly, without demanding recognition. And for the first time since the wedding had been arranged, Nina allowed herself to imagine a future that had not been decided for her by someone else. Nina did not sleep that night. The house was quiet in the particular way large homes often are, where silence does not feel empty but layered, as though many lives had passed through its rooms and left traces of themselves behind. The guest bedroom prepared for her overlooked the back garden, where low landscape lights cast soft pools of amber across the stone pathways. She had changed out of the wedding dress hours earlier, folding the silk carefully, almost respectfully, before placing it inside the garment bag provided by the hotel. The dress no longer represented obligation, yet it still carried the weight of the decision she had made inside it. She sat near the window wrapped in one of the simple cotton robes from the guest bath, watching the reflection of the room faintly overlap the darkened garden outside. Her phone lay on the bedside table. Several missed calls blinked quietly on the screen. Her mother, her aunt, an unknown number she assumed belonged to someone connected to Charles. She had not answered yet. It was not avoidance. It was the need to breathe before explaining something she was still learning to understand herself. A soft knock sounded at the door. Nina? Adrian's voice was low, careful not to intrude. Yes. He opened the door only slightly, enough to confirm she was awake. I didn't want to assume you'd be sleeping. I wasn't, he nodded once. I had the kitchen prepare something light. You should eat. I'm not hungry. That's understandable, he replied calmly. But stress and hunger together rarely improve decision-making. The logic was practical, almost understated, yet she found herself standing and following him down the quiet hallway. The kitchen felt different at night, warmer, less formal. A small lamp illuminated the marble island, casting soft shadows across polished surfaces. Someone had left a simple plate arranged neatly. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a slice of bread still warm. Adrian poured tea into 2 cups, setting one near her without comment. The familiar scent of chamomile rose gently between them. You remembered, she said quietly. You drink tea when you're overwhelmed. You notice that? I notice most things that concern people under my responsibility. She almost smiled. They sat across from each other in comfortable silence while she forced herself to eat small bites. The normalcy of the action steadied her nerves. Food had always been part of how her family processed difficult conversations. Sit down. Eat something. Talk after. After several minutes, she spoke. My mother is probably worried. She will be, Adrian acknowledged. She deserves an explanation. You should give her one when you're ready. Nina looked down at her tea. I don't want her thinking I ran away impulsively. You didn't. I still left my wedding in front of everyone we know. Yes, he said calmly. You did. He did not pretend the moment had been small. I should call her tonight. You should call her when your voice is steady enough to prevent the conversation from becoming about panic instead of truth. She exhaled slowly. That sounds like something someone learned the hard way. It is. She studied him quietly. You speak like someone who has made difficult decisions before. I have. Did you ever regret them? Yes. The honesty in the answer surprised her. Regret doesn't mean the decision was wrong, he continued. It usually means the circumstances required sacrifice. She absorbed the words carefully. Sacrifice. Her father had believed sacrifice was necessary for survival. Her mother believed sacrifice was necessary for stability. Now she was learning that sacrifice without consent could slowly erase a person. What happens now? She asked softly. That depends on what you want your life to look like. I don't even know where to start. That's normal after removing pressure you've been living under for months. He took a sip of tea before continuing. You don't need to decide tonight. I feel like I should. Urgency is often mistaken for importance, he replied. They are not the same. The quiet confidence in his voice made the room feel steadier. She looked at her hands. I don't want to move from one situation where I had no choice into another. You won't. You say that easily. I say that intentionally. Their eyes met briefly. She realized he was choosing his words carefully, allowing her space to process without pushing her toward any conclusion. For 4 years, she said slowly, you never once crossed a personal boundary. That was deliberate. Even when it was obvious my family was struggling. That was your information to share. You still helped. I ensured medical coverage for your mother remained active through the employee plan. Her head lifted. You knew about that? You requested schedule adjustments during her treatments. I didn't think anyone noticed. I noticed patterns. Nina leaned back slightly in her chair. You've been helping quietly for a long time. I've been ensuring the people who work here are treated fairly. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It isn't. The distinction hung gently between them. She studied his expression more carefully now. You could have told me about my father's financial situation earlier. Yes. Why didn't you? Because financial dependency complicates emotional clarity. The answer landed with unexpected precision. You didn't want me to feel obligated. Yes. You were protecting yourself, or me? Both. She nodded slowly. That's unusually considerate for someone with your reputation. He almost smiled. Reputations are often constructed by people observing outcomes without understanding motivations. That sounds like something a very careful man would say. I am a careful man. Silence settled comfortably again. Nina finished the last sip of tea, feeling warmth spread slowly through her chest. What did Charles say when you spoke to him? I didn't need to say much. You intimidated him. I presented information. That sounds worse. It was efficient. She shook her head slightly, amused despite the circumstances. I suppose efficiency is one way to describe it. Adrian rested his hands lightly on the table. Charles Whitmore prefers situations he can control. Today introduced uncertainty he did not anticipate. He'll try to contact me again. Possibly. I don't want a legal fight. You won't need one. You sound very certain. I am. She hesitated. I don't want anyone hurt. No one will be harmed. She studied his face again, searching for any sign of concealed aggression. There was none, only calm assurance. I believe you, she admitted quietly. That seemed to matter more than either of them expected. Another moment of silence passed before she spoke again. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to. That doesn't feel sufficient. Gratitude is most meaningful when it's not transactional. She considered that carefully. You're asking for nothing. I'm offering time. Time for what? For you to decide what comes next without pressure. The simplicity of the offer felt unfamiliar. She realized how rare that was. I haven't had time in months, she said softly. You have it now. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. What if I make the wrong decision next? Then you adjust. You say that like mistakes aren't permanent. Most mistakes are simply information gained too late. She smiled faintly. That's a very forgiving philosophy. It's practical. He stood, collecting the empty plate. You should rest. I might actually sleep now. That would be wise. She hesitated before leaving the kitchen. Adrian? Yes. Why did my message matter so much? He paused, considering the question carefully. Because you are not someone who asks for help lightly. That can't be the only reason. No, he admitted quietly. He met her eyes. You matter more than you realize. The words settled gently, not demanding interpretation. For the first time since the wedding had been arranged, Nina felt something unfamiliar return. And hope, she was beginning to understand, was far more powerful when freely chosen. Nina woke later than she expected. the pale morning light already filtering through the long linen curtains that framed the tall windows of the guest room. For a brief moment, she did not remember where she was. The quiet felt unfamiliar, too peaceful to belong to the kind of morning that usually followed difficult decisions. Then memory returned all at once, the sound of the bouquet falling to the floor. Adrian's hand extended toward her, offering choice without pressure. Her chest tightened, but this time not with panic. Something else lingered beneath the memory. Relief, perhaps. Or the early shape of dignity returning. She sat up slowly, brushing her fingers through her hair, noticing how still the house remained. Volkov estate operated with precise routine, but never with noise. Staff moved quietly, conversations remained discreet, and privacy was considered part of professionalism. For 4 years, she had been part of that rhythm. Now she was uncertain what her place inside it would be. She dressed simply in the clothes she had worn the day before the wedding rehearsal: dark jeans, a light sweater, comfortable shoes. Familiar choices grounded her. Normal clothes for an abnormal situation. Her phone rested on the bedside table, the screen dark now. The missed calls from the night before remained unanswered. She knew she could not postpone those conversations forever, but she also understood she needed clarity before offering explanations. When she stepped into the hallway, she noticed the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifting upward from the kitchen. Her first instinct was to check the time. 2:18 a.m. Her body recognized the hour immediately. For years, she had been placing coffee on Adrian's desk at precisely 7:25. The muscle memory remained so strong that she almost turned instinctively toward the staff pantry before remembering she was no longer on duty. She paused halfway down the staircase. Through the open doorway, she could see Adrian standing near the large kitchen window, sleeves rolled neatly at the forearms, measuring coffee grounds with careful precision. The morning light framed him in a quiet, almost ordinary moment she had never witnessed before. He prepared his own coffee. The realization felt strangely intimate. He noticed her presence without turning. "You're awake earlier than expected," he said. "I'm used to mornings. That's consistent." She hesitated near the doorway. "You don't need to make your own coffee," she said automatically, then immediately corrected herself. "I mean, you shouldn't feel obligated to change routines because of me." "I'm not changing routines," he replied calmly, setting the kettle back onto its base. "I simply chose to do this myself today." She stepped fully into the room. The familiar kitchen suddenly felt unfamiliar in her new role within it. "You've never made your own coffee when staff were present," she observed. "I have," he said, "just not when anyone was looking." That answer lingered quietly between them. He poured the espresso into a small white cup, then reached for another cup and filled it with a lighter roast. "You prefer something less strong in the morning." She blinked slightly. "You remember that?" "Yes." He slid the cup toward her across the marble surface. "Thank you." She wrapped her hands around the warmth, grounding herself in the familiar ritual. "You don't have to treat me like a guest," she said after a moment. "You're not being treated like a guest." "What am I being treated like?" "Someone whose circumstances changed quickly." That's a careful way of saying everything is uncertain. "Yes." She appreciated the honesty. After a few quiet sips, she spoke again. "I should call my parents today." "Yes. They deserve to hear from me directly." "They do. I don't want them thinking I was manipulated into leaving." "You weren't." "They might still worry." "They will worry," Adrian acknowledged. "Concern is part of caring." She studied the steam rising from her cup. "I want them to understand I made the decision myself. They will understand when they see you are stable. That might take time. Time is available." She leaned against the edge of the counter, considering everything ahead of her. "I also need to find somewhere else to live." Adrian's gaze lifted slightly. "You're welcome to remain here until you decide what arrangement suits you best." "I can't stay indefinitely." "I didn't suggest indefinitely. I don't want anyone thinking I traded one dependency for another." "You didn't." She searched his face carefully. "People will assume things. People often assume incorrectly. That doesn't stop assumptions from affecting reputations." He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. "You're concerned about dignity." "Yes." "That's reasonable." Silence settled briefly. "I can assist in arranging independent housing if you prefer," he offered. "I can handle that." "I know you can." The statement carried quiet respect rather than challenge. "But support does not eliminate independence," he added. She considered that carefully. "I don't want special treatment." "You won't receive special treatment." I already have. No, Adrian replied calmly. You received intervention in a situation involving coercion. That feels like more than intervention. That's because most people are unfamiliar with someone declining to take advantage of leverage. The statement held subtle meaning. You're saying you could have used this situation differently. Yes, but you didn't. No. She exhaled slowly. That matters. Yes. Her phone vibrated lightly in her hand. Her mother's name appeared again on the screen. Nina hesitated, then answered. Mom? Her mother's voice carried immediate relief. Oh, thank God. Nina, are you all right? I'm all right. What happened yesterday? Nina glanced briefly toward Adrian before stepping into the adjacent sitting room for privacy. I left because I didn't want the marriage. Her mother's silence lasted several seconds. You could have told us sooner. I was afraid of disappointing everyone. We would rather be disappointed than see you unhappy. The words loosened something in Nina's chest. I know that now. Are you safe? Yes. Where are you? At Adrian's house. A pause. The man from the church? Yes. Her mother hesitated again. Is he trustworthy? Nina looked toward the doorway where Adrian remained quietly in the kitchen, deliberately giving her space. Yes, she said with calm certainty. I believe he is. Her mother exhaled slowly. Your father feels terrible. This isn't his fault. He believes it is. I'll speak with him today. We're coming by this afternoon. Nina paused. Okay. After the call ended, she returned to the kitchen. My parents would like to visit. That's appropriate. You don't mind? I expected they might. They're traditional. I respect tradition. They may ask difficult questions. I would be disappointed if they didn't. She studied him thoughtfully. You're very calm about all of this. Calm allows better judgment. Most people would find this situation complicated. It is complicated. You don't seem overwhelmed. I focus on what can be solved first. And what can be solved first? Ensuring you feel secure enough to make decisions without pressure. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. You're very intentional with your words. Yes. Why? Because clarity prevents misunderstanding. She nodded slowly. Concepts that had been missing for months now appeared repeatedly in conversation. For the first time since the wedding had been arranged, Nina felt she was participating in shaping her own future rather than simply adapting to it. Outside, morning sunlight fully illuminated the garden, casting long shadows that gradually shortened as the day progressed. Change rarely arrived with dramatic announcements. Sometimes it appeared quietly, one conversation at a time. And sometimes, the most important turning points happened not in moments of chaos, but in moments where someone simply allowed you to decide who you wanted to become next. Frank Carter arrived 10 minutes early. Nina saw his truck turn slowly through the iron gates from the tall living room window. The familiar blue pickup looked slightly out of place among the quiet symmetry of Volkov Estate, its worn paint and modest presence a reminder of the world she had grown up in. Her father had always preferred practical vehicles. Reliable, affordable, something that could last 15 years with proper care. He stepped out slowly, smoothing the front of his jacket as though preparing himself for an interview rather than a visit with his daughter. Her mother followed, carrying the same handbag she had owned for nearly a decade, one she always described as still perfectly good. Nina moved toward the entry hall before the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, her mother embraced her tightly, relief arriving first, questions waiting politely behind it. Oh, honey, her mother whispered, pressing her cheek against Nina's hair. You gave us quite a scare. I'm sorry, Nina replied softly. I should have called sooner. Her father stood just behind them, hands in his pockets, studying her face carefully. You okay? He asked. Yes. He nodded once, as though measuring the truth of the answer for himself. That's what matters. Adrian approached from the sitting room, his posture composed but welcoming in a quiet, understated way. Mr. Carter, he said respectfully, extending his hand. Mrs. Carter, I appreciate you coming. Frank shook his hand firmly. Thank you for stepping in yesterday. No thanks are necessary. Her mother studied Adrian with polite curiosity, the instinctive evaluation of a parent trying to understand the man now connected to her daughter's future. You're very calm for someone involved in such an unusual situation, she observed. I find calm useful, Adrian replied. Her mother nodded, neither fully reassured nor suspicious. They moved into the sitting room, sunlight spilling across the polished wood floors. Nina had always appreciated the way the estate balanced elegance with restraint. Nothing felt excessive. Every object had purpose. Her father sat carefully on the edge of the sofa. "I suppose we should address the obvious," he began. "Yes," Nina agreed gently. Frank cleared his throat. "I never intended for you to feel forced into that marriage. I know. I should have found another solution. You tried. It wasn't enough." Nina leaned forward slightly. "You did what responsible parents do. You tried to protect stability." Frank shook his head slowly. "Protection shouldn't cost your freedom." Her mother placed a hand over his arm. "We thought we were helping," she said quietly. "I know," Nina repeated. Adrian remained silent, allowing the family space to speak openly. Frank looked toward him after a moment. "You seem to have resolved the financial situation. The matter no longer requires your daughter's involvement," Adrian confirmed. Frank's brow tightened slightly. "I don't like feeling indebted." "You are not indebted. That's difficult to believe. Your responsibility was to care for your family," Adrian said evenly. "That responsibility remains intact." Frank studied him carefully. "You speak like someone who understands obligation." "I do." Her mother clasped her hands together. "We don't want Nina to feel dependent on anyone." "She won't," Adrian replied calmly. Nina noticed how carefully he chose each word, avoiding anything that might imply control. "I'm going to find my own apartment," she said clearly. Her parents both turned toward her. "That's not necessary immediately," her mother said. "I need to re-establish normal structure," Nina explained. "I need to know I can stand on my own decisions." Frank nodded slowly. "That sounds reasonable." Adrian inclined his head slightly. "Support can exist without interference." Her father glanced between them, quietly assessing the dynamic. "You two speak like lawyers," he observed. "Clarity prevents misunderstanding," Adrian replied. Frank almost smiled. "I suppose that's true." Her mother leaned forward slightly. "Nina, sweetheart, were you unhappy long before yesterday?" Nina considered the question carefully. "I wasn't unhappy with my life," she said slowly. "I was unhappy with the direction it was being pushed." "That's an important difference," Adrian added quietly. Her mother studied her daughter's expression. "You look calmer today." "I feel calmer. That's enough for now." Frank exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. "I'm sorry it came to this." "I'm not," Nina replied gently. Her parents looked at her in mild surprise. "If I hadn't been pushed this far," she continued, "I might never have realized how much of my life I had allowed circumstances to decide." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes pressure reveals what matters most." Her mother reached across the table, squeezing Nina's hand. "We just want you safe." "I am safe." Frank turned toward Adrian again. "I don't pretend to fully understand your world," he said carefully. "But I do understand character. Yesterday, you gave my daughter a choice. That matters." Adrian accepted the statement without display. "Choice is rarely offered when power is involved," Frank continued. "I respect that you made it possible." Nina noticed the subtle shift in her father's tone. Not approval exactly, but recognition. Her mother glanced around the room. "This house is very quiet." "It helps maintain focus," Adrian replied. "I imagine your work requires that." "It does." Frank leaned back slightly. "What exactly is it that you do?" "I manage several investment firms," Adrian answered. "And people listen to you." "Sometimes." Frank nodded slowly. "Well, I appreciate that you listen to my daughter." Silence settled comfortably for a moment. Her mother rose first. "We should let you both return to your day." Nina walked them to the front door. Her father paused before stepping outside. "You don't have to rush your next decision," he said quietly. "I know. You've already shown more courage than most people manage in a lifetime." She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for understanding. We raised you to think for yourself," he replied softly. "We just forgot how strong that could be." After they left, Nina stood for a moment in the quiet entryway. Adrian remained near the staircase, giving her space. "They handled that better than I expected," she admitted. "They trust your judgment. That took time to earn." "It usually does." She looked toward the garden, sunlight now bright across the trimmed hedges. "I need to start planning what comes next." "You have options. I need to earn them." "You already have." "I still need structure." "You can return to work here temporarily if continuity helps." She shook her head gently. "That wouldn't be wise." "No," he agreed. "It wouldn't." The honesty reassured her. "I'd like to explore positions elsewhere," she continued. "Something that allows independence. I can provide references if useful." "That would help." I'll ensure they reflect your professionalism accurately. She smiled faintly. You make everything sound simple. Most things are simple once unnecessary pressure is removed. She considered that. Outside, the afternoon air carried the quiet hum of ordinary life continuing. Nina realized she no longer felt trapped between obligation and fear. The path ahead remained uncertain, but uncertainty no longer felt dangerous. Sometimes the most important turning point in a person's life wasn't the moment everything changed. It was the moment they realized change had already happened, and they were still standing. By late afternoon, the house had settled into a calm rhythm again, but Nina sensed that something beneath the surface had begun to move. Not urgency, not danger, just quiet resolution forming itself in the background of Adrian's world. She found him in the study, seated behind the wide oak desk she had dusted hundreds of times before. The room smelled faintly of paper, leather, and the subtle trace of espresso that had long been part of his morning routine. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed muted light to stretch across the shelves of carefully arranged books and documents. Everything remained in order, yet the atmosphere carried the quiet intensity of decisions already underway. You're working, she observed gently. I always am, Adrian replied without looking up immediately. That answer would have sounded distant days ago. Now, it sounded honest. She stepped slightly further into the room. I don't want my situation to create complications for you. It hasn't. Charles Whitmore isn't the type of man who accepts embarrassment easily. No, Adrian agreed calmly. He isn't. You're certain this won't escalate? It already reached its highest point yesterday. That seems optimistic. It's practical. She leaned lightly against the edge of the bookshelf, noticing the subtle precision of how every object in the room had been positioned intentionally. What happened after we left the church? Adrian closed a folder and rested his hands on the desk. Charles contacted his legal team within 20 minutes. That quickly, men accustomed to control rarely tolerate unpredictability. And he was advised that pursuing the marriage publicly after yesterday's interruption would attract attention he prefers to avoid. You mean scrutiny? Yes. Her expression tightened slightly. You didn't threaten him directly. I didn't need to. But you showed him something. I showed him information already available to those willing to examine his financial partnerships carefully. She absorbed the statement slowly. You exposed risk. I clarified it. Nina exhaled. I don't want revenge. This is not revenge. What is it? Correction. The word landed with quiet precision. Charles Whitmore built influence partly through arrangements that depend on appearances remaining intact. Yesterday changed those appearances. You dismantled leverage. Yes. And now he'll withdraw. Yes. She considered the implications carefully. You operate very quietly. Noise creates resistance. You didn't destroy him. I removed his advantage. That distinction mattered more than she expected. Silence settled for a moment. I don't want anyone thinking I left because someone more powerful intervened, she said. You left because you chose not to proceed. That part needs to remain clear. It will. She studied his face thoughtfully. You've already anticipated public interpretation. I always do. What will people say? People will say many things, most of them incomplete. That doesn't concern you? No. It concerns me. That's understandable. She paused. I want to maintain my own reputation. You will. I worked very hard to build it. I'm aware. You always seem to notice when staff were dependable. Reliability is rare. I don't want that overshadowed. It won't be. She nodded slowly. Thank you. Adrian opened a thin file and turned it toward her. Inside were printed documents detailing the formal dissolution of the financial agreement her father had signed under pressure. The debt structure has been legally reassigned, he explained. To whom? To a firm that does not require personal conditions for resolution. You own that firm. I oversee it. That's the same thing. No, he said calmly. Ownership and oversight operate differently. She almost smiled. You're very precise with definitions. Precision prevents future misunderstandings. She read through the documents carefully. This gives my father time to repay without penalties. Yes. He'll insist on paying every dollar. I expect that. You could have simply erased the debt. That would have damaged his sense of dignity. She looked up at him. You understand him. I understand men who define themselves by responsibility. She closed the folder gently. This matters more than the money. Yes. Outside the study window, late afternoon sunlight shifted toward evening, casting longer shadows across the garden paths. What happens if Charles attempts contact again? She asked. He will likely avoid direct communication. And indirectly? He may attempt social messaging through mutual acquaintances. You're certain? Predictable behavior patterns rarely change quickly. She considered that quietly. I don't want ongoing conflict. You won't have one. That sounds very certain again. It is. Erchaze lingered on him. You seem to operate on confidence. I operate on preparation. Those sound similar. They are not. Another quiet pause. I owe you honesty, she said finally. You don't owe me anything. I want clarity. That I can provide. She drew a steady breath. Yesterday, when you walked into the church, that wasn't only about helping me avoid a marriage. No. You made a personal decision. Yes. You risked public attention. Yes. You don't strike me as someone who enjoys unnecessary attention. I don't. Then why come personally? Adrian considered the question carefully. Some decisions should not be delegated. You said that before. It remains true. That still isn't the full answer. No, he admitted. His voice remained steady. For several years I have ensured distance between professional authority and personal sentiment. She waited quietly. That distance became unsustainable yesterday. Her pulse quickened slightly. You mean? Yes. He did not elaborate further. He did not need to. Understanding settled slowly between them. You cared long before yesterday. Yes. And you never said anything? No. Why? Because the presence of power alters the meaning of confession. You thought I would feel pressured. Yes. You were protecting me from feeling obligated. Yes. She absorbed the truth carefully. You chose silence instead. I chose patience. That must have been frustrating. It was necessary. She studied him for a long moment. You're very disciplined. Yes. Most people wouldn't wait that long. Most people prioritize immediate satisfaction. You prioritized something else. Your autonomy. The word settled gently between them. Autonomy. Freedom without influence. Respect without expectation. I need time, she said quietly. I know. I don't want emotion confused with gratitude. That distinction is important. I don't want to feel like I exchanged one commitment for another. You haven't. I need to rebuild my life step by step. You should. She hesitated. You're willing to wait? I already have. Something in his expression softened slightly. Time clarifies intention, he added. She nodded slowly. I appreciate that. He inclined his head once. No decision made under pressure produces lasting stability. That sounds like experience speaking. It is. Evening light dimmed gradually beyond the tall windows. Nina realized something had changed again, quietly but permanently. The danger she had feared had passed. The obligation she had resisted had dissolved. What remained was possibility, not demanded, not rushed, simply present. For the first time since she sent the message that changed everything, she understood something clearly. Rescue was not the end of her story. Choice was. The following morning arrived quietly, without urgency, without the sharp pressure that had defined the previous weeks of Nina's life. Sunlight filtered gently through the tall windows of the breakfast room, touching the polished wooden table with a calm consistency that felt reassuring in its simplicity. Chicago moved through another ordinary day outside the estate gates, unaware that inside one woman's life had quietly realigned itself. Nina sat with a cup of coffee in front of her, appreciating the warmth more than the taste. For the first time in months, she was not rushing to meet someone else's expectations. There was no wedding timeline, no forced politeness, no need to rehearse acceptance of a future she did not choose. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt open. Adrian entered the room a few minutes later, already dressed for the day, the quiet precision of his routine unchanged. Discipline had always defined the way he moved through the world. It was evident in the way he set documents neatly beside his place at the table, in the way he acknowledged her presence with a simple nod rather than unnecessary words. Good morning, he said. Good morning. Did you sleep? Yes. That's good. There was something grounding about the normal rhythm of conversation. No dramatic declarations, no emotional pressure, just continuity. Nina traced the rim of the coffee cup with her fingertip, gathering the thoughts she had been organizing since the night before. I've been thinking about what comes next, she began. That's a productive use of time. I don't want yesterday to define me. It doesn't. But it changed everything. Yes. She looked at him directly. I don't want to be seen as someone who escaped one situation only to depend on another. You aren't. I need to rebuild something that belongs to me. You will. I'd like to return to work soon. That's reasonable. I've already started reviewing positions. If you'd like references, I will provide them. Thank you. He accepted the response without elaboration, allowing her to continue at her own pace. I want to work somewhere my decisions remain fully my own. That aligns with what I understand about you. I may need time before everything feels steady again. Stability rarely arrives immediately after change. She allowed herself a small smile. You always make things sound manageable. They usually are, once unnecessary fear is removed. Her expression grew more thoughtful. I spoke with my father again last night. And he apologized 3 times. That suggests sincerity. He still feels responsible. He always will. He said something that stayed with me. Adrian waited. He said he was proud that I didn't confuse obligation with loyalty. That's a meaningful distinction. I didn't fully understand it until now. Many people don't. She leaned back slightly in her chair. For months, I believed I was doing the honorable thing. You were trying to protect your family. I forgot to protect myself. That happens when pressure is sustained long enough. Her gaze drifted briefly toward the window, where the garden looked unchanged by any of the decisions made inside the house. I don't want to live cautiously forever, she said quietly. You won't need to. I don't want fear to influence the rest of my life. It won't, unless you allow it. She nodded slowly. Yesterday felt terrifying. That's understandable. But walking away also felt right. That's usually how clarity feels. She hesitated slightly before continuing. I meant what I said yesterday. Which part? I need time. You have time. I don't want emotion mistaken for certainty. That's wise. I need to understand who I am without pressure. That's a process worth completing. She studied him for a moment. You really are willing to wait. I wouldn't offer the option otherwise. That level of patience is rare. Patience tends to produce better outcomes. Or missed opportunities. Opportunities that require urgency rarely sustain themselves. The logic was characteristically measured. I don't want to be influenced by gratitude, she continued. You shouldn't be. I don't want to feel indebted emotionally. You aren't. I want any decision I make next to be fully mine. That's the only kind that lasts. The quiet agreement between them felt balanced, not romantic in the conventional sense. More deliberate than that. More respectful. She exhaled slowly. I'm grateful you didn't tell me how to feel. I wouldn't. You gave me room to think. That was always the intention. Silence settled comfortably again, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt stable. I think I understand something now, she said. And what is that? Real support doesn't remove responsibility. No. It restores the ability to choose responsibly. Yes. She nodded once, as though confirming something privately. I don't regret yesterday. You shouldn't. I regret waiting so long to admit the truth to myself. That's common when decisions affect other people. I thought sacrifice automatically meant maturity. It sometimes does, and sometimes it means fear. Yes, she considered that carefully. My father said something else. Adrian waited. He said dignity is the only thing that grows stronger when protected. That sounds accurate. She smiled faintly. He has a simple way of explaining complicated ideas. Simple ideas often endure longest. Another quiet pause passed between them. Nina stood slowly, carrying her empty cup toward the counter. I'm going to start apartment viewings this week. I'll have someone provide a list of suitable neighborhoods if that's helpful. That would help. I'll ensure the list prioritizes safety and convenience. Thank you. He inclined his head once, acknowledging the practical nature of the request. She paused near the doorway. One more thing. Yes? I don't want yesterday to be the only reason we continue speaking. It won't be. I'd like whatever develops next to feel natural. It will. I want honesty. You'll have it. And patience. You already do. She studied him quietly. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel rushed. That's a good place to begin. Outside, the city continued its quiet motion. Traffic lights changing. Pedestrians moving through ordinary routines. The world unchanged by one woman reclaiming her life. Some stories ended with dramatic declarations or sudden certainty. This one did not. This story ended with something quieter. Two people sitting across from one another without pressure, without obligation, without performance, only possibility. And sometimes, possibility was the most honest form of hope, because the strongest foundations were rarely built on urgency. They were built on the quiet decision, repeated over time, to choose freely. For Nina Carter, the message she had sent in desperation had not only changed the direction of a single day, it had restored something far more valuable: the right to decide what her life would become next. The story reminds us that true love never demands surrender of dignity, and real strength often appears in the quiet courage to say no when the world expects obedience. Loyalty should never feel like a cage, and responsibility should never erase personal freedom. Sometimes, the most important act of bravery is choosing yourself, even when others expect sacrifice. The story teaches that power, when guided by integrity, should protect choice rather than control it. In the end, justice is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it simply restores a person's right to decide their own future, reminding us that respect, patience, and honesty are the only foundations strong enough to build lasting love. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.